There are a lot of treasure hunts that have gone on over the last decades, and every single time people wonder, why haven't I found the treasure? Or they wonder why it hasn't been discovered quickly. There are treasure hunts that have been going on for 3 or 4 decades, and some of the treasures have still not been discovered. Most of them, or all of them in some cases. And having studied the communities and studied treasure hunt design for a number of years, I've noticed some patterns. And here's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to walk you through the 7 main reasons why people don't seem to discover the treasures that they're looking for. Now, this is coming again from myself as an ethnographic researcher who likes to study cultures and communities, and I'm intrigued by the treasure hunt design communities that emerge, and I'm also intrigued by the designers and how to design effective learning environments and game environments and other things like that. And so I'm coming to you as an observer, as one who's just seeing these patterns over and over and over again, and eventually they become so clear and consistent that they're largely undeniable. And that's what I'm going to walk through in this video. I'm going to give you 7 different reasons why people tend to not discover the treasures that they're searching for. And if you look at history and you look at those who do discover treasures, they tend to do things a little differently than these 7. So let's go ahead and walk through. The first one is their treasure hunting is based on their own prior knowledge. Some talk about this as confirmation bias, that you have certain beliefs that you get attached to, and now you're interpreting everything through those beliefs. But I'm talking about something a little bit different. It's related, and I guess you could call it confirmation bias. But I'm talking about treasure hunting based upon your prior knowledge. So when you are reading clues that are provided in a poem or a book, or you're looking at a treasure map, all of us, this is a common thing, just the way the human mind works, is when we encounter something new, we try to make sense of it based on our prior knowledge, on what we already know. So if you've done prior treasure hunts, you've watched treasure hunt movies, you remember scavenger hunts as a kid, there are just certain habits or books that you've read perhaps, that's the knowledge that you have about treasure hunting. And so the tendency is that most of us are going to try to interpret and make sense of whatever we're reading and whatever we're looking at based upon that knowledge that we already have. And yet, one of the challenges is that in a treasure hunt, you often have to go beyond your current knowledge base. You have to do research, not because you're going out to find the clues. Maybe all the clues have been provided to you, but you need context. You need additional knowledge, background knowledge, and background information that makes something more apparent and clearer to you than it would be without that knowledge. In fact, it would be entirely invisible to you without a certain body of knowledge. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that you are in the John Collins Black There's Treasure Inside treasure hunt, and you've grown up in Vermont, and you've hiked the Appalachian Trail, and you've been through the Green Mountains and the White Mountains, and you spent a lot of time out, and you know a lot of the trail names and a lot of things that are happening. And as you're going through and you're reading the chapter about the box that's allegedly hidden somewhere on the Appalachian footpath, you are starting to connect it with all of your experiences and all of those things that you remember growing up. And maybe that's right. Maybe you have an advantage. Maybe the fact is that most people that are in the treasure hunt don't have that background knowledge, and you have an advantage. But it's also possible that you are so fixed on your own experiences hiking the Appalachian Trail that you're just limiting your search to those areas that are familiar to you, the terms and the phrases that are familiar to you, and you're making all these connections, and you convince yourself that it's true. So part of a good treasure hunter is one that can bracket their own assumptions and that can expand their knowledge base broadly enough that they can actually see the patterns that were intended by the designer. And I'm going to get back to that one a little bit later. Second one, following single clues rather than layered clues. Oftentimes we develop our favorite clues. So say again, I'm using the John Collins Black There's Treasure Inside treasure hunt, but this can apply to any treasure hunt that you're a part of. say you find some kind of clue that's really strong. It's a story and it seems evident. And there's a statement that just seems out of place if it were just being a book written about a particular gem or a person or something like that. And you are confident that this is a clue, but you treat it as sort of the king clue, as the primary clue. And then you look for corroborating clues to support it, as if they're secondary to the one that you've just really fallen in love with. And so you're really just chasing after a single clue and trying to convince yourself that it's a good thing to keep pursuing further and further. Now, this is different from the treasure hunters who are really in a more systematic, analytical way, an unbiased way. They want to be proven wrong quickly, so that they can get to a better path. Instead of doing that, they try to convince themselves that, no, this is it. This is the single clue, the one clue that rules them all. But instead, clues are often layered and clustered. In a traditional treasure hunt, you often have one clue leads to another clue, leads to another clue. But in a single object-based treasure hunt where you have the majority or almost all of the clues in a single book or a map or something like that, the connections between the clues matters a great deal. If you look at treasure hunts that have been solved in the past, you'll see that happen. You'll see that pattern. It's very rare that they're just completely disconnected clues in some way. They usually have some kind of layering or connection, and it's in looking at the clues in a layered way and not giving precedent or priority to one over another unless the treasure hunt designer has led you to do that in an obvious way. That's a recipe for misleading yourself and leading yourself down the wrong path. The third one is looking in your own mind and not in the mind of the designer. And I see this so much. Now, this can relate to the others that I've described, but it's a little bit different because looking in your own mind maybe you do a lot of research. Maybe you gain additional knowledge. But what you start doing is you start putting yourself in the shoes of the designer with a question like, well, if I were designing it, I would do it this way. The problem is you're not designing it. You're not the designer. You're not the one in charge. It doesn't matter how much you want the treasure to be in a certain place or how much you believe the treasure to be in a certain place. The treasure is objectively in one place and only one place. Or there are 5 treasures. Each of them are in only one place. And this does not change according to our whims, our wills, our preferences, or what's going on in our mind, or how we would have done things differently if we were the treasure hunt designer. And so those who are really effective take the time to try to get into the mind of the treasure hunter a little bit. What are the influence of this treasure hunter? You can even do a sort of psychological profile. And I have a video that attempts to do one on John Collins Black in There's Treasure Inside, and I'm sure that part of it's flawed and some of it's accurate as well. But trying to look beyond your own mind and trying to really understand how another person thinks about this and how they thought about it and how it shaped their design and their consideration. That can be really powerful, and successful treasure hunters are often able to think about things. They think about it in historical perspective. Maybe it was a treasure hunt that was hidden in the 1980s. Well, what was different about life in the 80s than compared to today? Or where did they grow up and what were their influences and things like that? Next one is assuming that this is number 4, you assume you know the rules of the game. So sometimes people are too quick to assume that they've figured out how the treasure hunt is designed, where the clues are hidden, where they're not hidden, what constitutes a clue, what doesn't constitute a clue, the kind of style or language that the designer is using. And while it's good, and that's really important to take the time to understand the rules of the game. In fact, that's the next thing I'm going to talk about, is you also want to be careful not to assume that you know the rules of the game. You can tentatively hold on to a set of rules that you think are the operating rules, but be open to being proven wrong and hold them tentatively, hold them kind of loosely. so that you're ready to kind of let them go and have your hands ready to grasp something that's going to be better and more effective down the road. And then similarly, number 5, I would say the flaw that a lot of people make is not even trying to understand the rules of the game. That they treat it as if it's just a bunch of random clues and there's a treasure somewhere, and not realizing that there actually is a narrative arc in most treasure hunts, that there is something that's more connecting. Now, it's possible and it's true that there are some kinds of treasure hunts where the designer really didn't put a lot of thought into it and kind of hid the treasure somewhere and wrote a poem and said, go find it. I would say that the Forrest Fenn treasure is a little lighter on treasure hunt design principles, for example, but there are still some rules of the game. Understanding the rules that are explicitly stated, so you know them and you're operating by them, and you don't convince yourself to let them go, or sometimes we can even convince ourselves, well, maybe he was tricking us, or it was a red herring, or something like that. No, treasure. If the rules have been stated explicitly, follow them, and if the rules have not been explicitly stated, you can begin to surface them and discover them, but hold them lightly. So that's kind of how 5 and 6 or 4 and 5 go together, assuming you know the rules of the game or not trying to understand the rules of the game at all. Number 6, most people are actually not going out and looking. They're not getting boots on the ground, as we might say. So there are a lot of armchair hunters who want to try to figure everything out in their head before they actually go out and look. And here's the problem with that in most treasure hunt designs. The way that the clues are written is that many clues tend to be written or created so that they only make sense when you're at a certain time or a certain place. If you think about a movie like National Treasure, you may recall that there was one particular treasure where there are these spectacles that were hidden below the Liberty Bell in a brick that you had to kind of locate. But you couldn't actually find the right brick unless you went there at the right time of day, and there was going to be a shadow. And so when you would look, you would see the shadow pointing to the proper location and the proper brick. Well, that's a very literal one, but it's true also with treasure hunts that oftentimes a clue will not make sense unless you're in the right time or in the right place. And so there is a kind of exploration that's expected in the game design that we call treasure hunts. It's not expected that in most treasure hunts you just follow step by step by step and it takes you within 6 inches of the treasure. Sometimes it takes you within 50 yards or something like that, but then you actually have to just do some exploring and some searching around. So most are not actually going out in order to get the context that they need to understand the clues. And that leads me to the 7th one, which is many times people don't find the treasure because they expect it to be easy or obvious. Now, oftentimes, like in the John Collins Black, there's Treasure Inside Treasure Hunt. He does give some rules to make sure that people don't put their life in jeopardy and do something really dangerous and search for the treasures. But that doesn't mean that the treasure is obvious. So maybe you figured everything out and you get all the way to within 10 or 20 or 30 yards of where the treasure is actually hidden or located. And even though it's not buried, don't expect that it's going to be easily discoverable or visible. There could be extra levels of hiddenness that are applied to this treasure box, and so don't assume that it's going to be easy. You may have to search. In fact, I would say this. I would bet that in the John Collins Black, there's Treasure Inside Treasure Hunt. Once all of the treasures are found, if and when that happens someday, I would expect that there will have been hundreds of people who walked within feet or yards of almost every single treasure in search for the treasure. And they walked away determining that that location is not the right one, and it's just not to be found. They expected it to be a little bit too easy or too obvious. They didn't engage in the actual kind of hunt part where, okay, the clues got you this far, but now you're going to actually just have to do some hard work of searching and looking really closely and looking over and over and over and over again. It's like if you've ever had to solve a math problem or some kind of complex problem that you're trying to solve in your work or your life or in school or something like that, and you look at it one or two or three or four times and it just doesn't make sense. Sometimes you have to look at it 10 or 15 or 20 times before you notice it. Even if you lose your keys, how many times have you lost your keys and you've walked past them, or they're in your hand or they're somewhere else? Well, that can happen also in the treasure hunt. So that would be it. So let me just do a quick recap. The 7 reasons why the treasure hasn't been discovered so far, I would argue, are: 1, people are treasure hunting based on their own prior knowledge, and that confirmation bias is coming in there, and they're not doing enough of the research, really neutral, unbiased research. We call it dispassionate research. 2nd, following single clues rather than looking for the layered clues. 3rd, looking in your own mind and not trying to truly understand the mind of the designer. 4th, assuming you know the rules of the game. Or 5th, not trying to understand the rules of the game. Then 6th, most people are really not going out and actually looking, which is necessary. And then finally, 7th, expecting it to be easy or obvious. That's it. Those are my 7 reasons. I look forward to your comments, and I'll give you more content like this if it interests you. Thanks.